because I think it's important for for the audience to hear. So say I had like a student, went to an independent school, did like really good GCSEs, really good personal statement, did very well in their admissions test or written work, very good interview. Would they like receive an offer? Hello everyone, we're here for another episode of Cambridge from the Inside. My name is Siam, I'm the Outreach Communications Officer, and I'm here with...
I'm Marcus Tomalin, I'm the Director of Admissions here at Trinity Hall, and Trinity Hall is one of the colleges at the University of Cambridge.
Nice. So today we're going to be talking about how we will assess your application if you were to apply to Cambridge. There's a lot of information about this online already. But it just seems like no matter like what we say to people online or in like talk to schools or etc., I think people just don't believe us. There must be the admissions team must be doing something different behind closed doors. There's conversations behind closed doors that are not shared with the outer world. So. We're behind closed doors. We're going to record this podcast, have this conversation. And before we get into how we will assess your application, which we will, I think it's important to just quickly go through what different pieces of information that we ask from the students. And if you want to know the processes of getting those pieces of information, we have done other videos and podcasts on those. And do check them out. I think there's some admissions FAQs and our presentation videos that are done by Marcus. So as our Director of Admissions, Marcus, you've got a student at a student's profile in front of you. What pieces of information do we have from them?
Yeah, so just a sort of brief reminder of the things we have. We have their UCAS application, because everyone who applies to Cambridge or any other UK university has to apply through UCAS. At Cambridge, we ask people to submit an additional questionnaire that's called My Cambridge Application. And between those two sources of information, we have things like the personal statements, we have things like predicted grades, we have things like GCSE performance and all of those sorts of things. Then, depending upon the course that someone's applied for, we might ask them to submit written work, in which case we have that to consider as well. Again, depending upon the course, they might have to take an admissions assessment, and if they do, then we have that as well, so we can see how they performed in relation to other applicants in the admissions assessment. And then if we call someone for interviews, then we have the interviews as well. And in addition to those things, again, if this is relevant for a particular applicant, we have what's called the extenuating circumstances form here at Cambridge. So if someone's, if their academic work has been really quite severely disrupted, either by illness or by really serious disruption at their school, they can give us details about that. And we also have some information about their sort of circumstances, their educational circumstances, and their sort of social circumstances. So we have information about whether they're on free school meals or whether they've been in care. So those are all the things that we have, and I mean, we can talk about this in more detail today, but we sort of look at all of those things when we come to make our decisions, and that's really why the buzzword that you'll see on the web pages and you'll hear people use when they're giving talks about Cambridge admissions. The buzzword is holistic, or holistically. We assess all the applications holistically, and that's kind of true, but maybe that's something we can clarify with some, specific examples during this conversation.
So you say that we assess applications holistically. Can you explain to us what holistically means?
Yeah, it just really means that we consider all of those things that I've mentioned, and if we did not assess things holistically, then it probably means that we'd throw away most of that information and just base our decision on, say, I don't know, the interviews, or just base our decision on the performance in the admissions assessment, and we'd just disregard everything else. But that's not what we do. Quite the opposite. We're constantly mindful of all of those sources of information, and we try and get as complete a picture as we can of that particular applicant, their social and educational circumstances while they're at school, how they've performed in relation to the various things we've asked them to do as part of the application process. And we're simply trying to work out, given all of those things, which applicants have the best ability and potential. And then we make our offers to the ones that we feel have the best ability and potential.
Nice. And I think I'm just going to try to really explain for viewers who aren't aware of like the Cambridge system, how this like looks on the ground. So when we say we assess applications holistically, that's not like a piece of AI software that takes in all the pieces of information, does like a simulation and then outputs like a number and then says accept or reject or anything like that. And not only is it just like one individual, or like a few individuals across the university who are looking at all of the applications. So Cambridge is a university of 29 colleges. Each of those colleges not only has an admissions tutor like Marcus, so Marcus is our director of admissions for Trinity Hall, but also the directors of studies, who are the academics teaching their course in those colleges, are heavily involved with the admissions process. And then we also have the admissions officer, who is very much the head of all of the admin, all of the admissions, who also has like a huge role in helping, aiding the decisions, given that those individuals first and foremost are in touch with all of the information and then funnel the information through to the director of admissions. So yeah, there's 29 colleges, and what's happening in each of the colleges, you have like the admissions tutor and the academics for each course, all talking through these applications very thoroughly. Each application's like viewed by several human beings and handled with like a lot of care and scrutiny. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think, would you agree that no application is, or every application is, there's a lot of thought that's gone into before reaching a decision?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it would be fabulous if we could do it all using some sort of AI system, because it means that I could take a holiday for most of December and January. But no one's ever figured out a way in which we could do that and then guarantee that we make good decisions. So if anyone listening has any suggestions, do get in touch with us. But no, as things stand at the moment, it's as Siam has summarised, it's a number of human beings who are very closely involved in the process, and the decisions as to who we make offers to are only made after really quite lengthy discussions that go on after we've accumulated all of that information that I summarised earlier. And often they're difficult discussions. It's not the case always that the people involved in assessing agree 100%. I mean, we might agree about the applicants who just seem by far the strongest in a given cohort, because that might just be so obvious that it doesn't need to be discussed for that long. And we might agree about the ones who comparatively are quite weak in a given cohort. So in the extremes, there might be a pretty much 100% consensus. But it tends to be a bit more in the middle, where someone has really impressed us in some respects, but maybe impressed us less in other respects. Should we make that person an offer or not? That's when people might view it slightly differently. And so, yeah, there were really long, interesting, but sometimes quite challenging conversations. But I think that sort of scrutiny is important. We're not doing this lightly. We're not doing this quickly and carelessly. We're doing this, I think, in a really sort of dedicated way, which, we're confident leads to better outcomes than if we just automated the whole process and did it through some kind of crude number crunching.
Yeah, and I think we keep talking about, I guess I'm going to talk about the pools now and keep talking about it and saying we'll do a podcast on the winter pool, which we will. But as it is, I think it is very relevant here for people to know that, say, if a college was to deem, so these few individuals, the individuals assessing the application, if you were to deem an applicant not worthy of an offer, for a lot of applicants, that's not the end of the story. That there's like a large database where all of the colleges are the database being the winter pool, where all of the colleges can see these applicants who didn't make it in their own college. Can you explain a bit more about that to us, and how that means that a lot of colleges assess applicants, not just the one that they applied to?
Absolutely, yeah. So the winter pool, as we call it, is our redistribution mechanism. And so, if for a particular subject we happen to have, a really amazing set of applicants here at Trinity Hall in a given year, we'll offer to as many of the really outstanding students as we can. But there are just always limits on how many offers we can make, and this is true for all the colleges. We have a finite number of bedrooms and things like that. So there comes a point where we just can't make any more offers. And yet, if there are still, really stunning applicants that we've had, and for logistical reasons we just can't make them offers, that's when we'll place them in the winter pool, and we'll make all their paperwork, all the information that I summarised will be available to our colleagues at all the other colleges. And if they've had a weaker set of applicants in a given year, then they're free to make offers to people that we've placed in the pool. For some subjects also, there are some constraints that are kind of placed on the colleges. So we have a number of subjects which in the Cambridge jargon are called numbers managed subjects. And what that means is, again, for logistical reasons across the university, the colleges, when you sort of put them all together, cannot as a group make above a certain number of offers. So in those cases, we have to do a lot of coordinating between the colleges to make sure that the offers go to the best applicants. And if, say here at Trinity Hall, we can only make, 2 offers for a given subject because we have a limit that's imposed upon us by the university. If we have 4 stunning applicants for that subject, we'll try and work out who the best 2 are, and we'll offer to those. But the other 2 we'll place in the pool, and hopefully, they'll receive an offer from another college. So the pool is an essential part of our kind of decision-making process.
Yeah, and it really shows that how many people will be assessing your application. So even though we're saying that we assess applicants holistically, when schools come and visit or we're doing residentials, a lot of the questions that students have, I quote unquote, I've heard someone put their hand up and say, I know you say you assess applicants holistically, but what is really the most important part of the application? And is there a part of the application that's more important than the others?
There isn't a single part of it that's more important. Different things have kind of different weightings. So often when people are applying, they really obsess about, say, their personal statement, and often they spend, countless hours drafting and redrafting their personal statement. I'd say from our perspective, the personal statements are less important than other parts of the application, things like performance in the admissions assessments, for example, or maybe performance in the interviews. That's not to say it's not, the personal statement isn't a really important source of information for us. And it's not to say the personal statement might not feature in at least one of the interviews. You might be asked some questions about it. But we don't mark the personal statements and give them a score and rank order them. And I think we've got another podcast that's specifically about personal statements. Yeah. So if people want to hear more about how we actually make use of personal statements, that podcast should give you a sort of fuller picture. So something like the personal statement is useful and informative but it's less important than some of the other things. But it's certainly not the case that there's just one thing that is absolutely crucial and the rest is irrelevant. So it's not the case that the interviews are the only things that matter, and it's not the case that the admissions assessments are the only things that matter. Because if that were the case, we'd be lying if we said it was holistic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the kind of the point I'm trying to get, is that there's kind of a back and forth of we assess applicants holistically. People say, oh, but there has to be a part that's more important, and we're like, well, no. I mean, common sense maybe is a bit harsh, but I really think the wider world outside of Cambridge admissions can kind of work out what decisions we make if they were to kind of think it through from our perspective and had like the profiles in front of them. It's like it is a kind of like common sense judgment from that kind of.
Well, I often say that, if I'm asked about this at open days or when schools come to visit and either applicants or teachers ask, I often just say, look, if you were in my position, you'd probably do something very, very, very similar to what I do. So again, if someone is got great GCSE performance and great predicted grades and has done really well in the admissions assessment, and maybe they submitted written work and it was really excellent and did amazingly in the interviews, we're going to make them an offer. I mean, what would be the reason for not making them an offer? And conversely, if their GCSEs weren't very convincing and, the admissions assessment performance wasn't convincing, blah, 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 we're probably not going to make them an offer unless there are some really, really strong extenuating circumstances. So that's all straightforward. And the difficult cases, as I mentioned earlier, are the ones in the middle, where some things are impressive, other things less impressive. And I think anyone who was in my seat doing my job would do it in that kind of way and view it in that kind of way. Yeah. So as you say, it's kind of a common sense approach, I guess.
Yeah, and I think one thing that isn't, because like as you mentioned, like a lot of people talk a lot about personal statements. One thing that isn't spoken, I think, enough about is how many students, like even when they have an offer, their A-level grades miss the offer and then therefore don't end up coming to Cambridge. Some of them are picked up from the summer pool. Some of them are still provided an offer even though they've missed it, as in they're provided a place despite missing the offer. But I think if there was one place to focus your attention, I would really try to make sure you get the grades, but even the best grades with like a poor aspect of each of the other points of the application, interview, personal statement, admissions tests in particular, what would you say if you had an applicant, they got the grades but they had like very weak performances in most other places of the application?
And by getting the grades, you mean the predicted grades?
So their grades met the entry requirement or like surpassed it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if someone applies and their predicted grades meet the entry requirement or surpass it, that's one of the things that we'll focus on in the early stages of assessing the application, because the initial decision that we have to make is whether we want to ask someone to come for interviews or whether we choose to kind of reject their application before the interview stage. And at Cambridge, I mean, it varies a little bit from subject to subject, but on average, we interview somewhere usually between about 70% or 75% of all the people who apply to us, which is much higher than, say, a university like Oxford, where, I mean, I'm less confident about the Oxford stats because I'm not based at Oxford, but I think it's usually around sort of 40% that are interviewed. So we interview a much larger percentage of the people who apply. So that's often the initial decision that we're having to make. Do we call this person for interviews or do we not call this person for interviews? And anyone who's not called for interview can't receive an offer.
I realised my question didn't make a lot of sense because I said if someone had like very good grades but poor aspects of the other parts of the application, would they receive an offer? But almost all of the applicants are applying with predicted grades. They wouldn't have they haven't finished their A levels yet. But that does go on to another point in if you apply post A level and have the grades, having the grades, you're in a stronger position than predicted grades. Sure.
Absolutely, because if people do apply, again, the jargon is a post-qualification application. So if someone takes their A-levels or their IB exams or their Scottish Highers, whatever it is, and after they've got those results, they then apply. So if you like, they apply maybe during their gap year. Then, if they go through the process and if we're really impressed, then the offer they receive won't have any conditions attached to it. They won't be expected to achieve a certain level in their exams because they've already taken them. So they'll receive an unconditional offer rather than a conditional offer, which basically means if they want to accept the offer and come and study with us here, then that's what will happen.
Yeah. But I think, it's almost a question that's not worth asking, but if someone was to apply during their gap year and they had the grades, but there wasn't a lot of effort put into their personal statement or admissions test and or interview, I guess then that's, even though they have the grades, that suddenly what should have been, what could have been a straightforward decision suddenly now becomes quite a difficult conversation.
Yeah, and again, each year, there are people who apply having already taken their school exams, and maybe they've achieved, really excellent results. But as you say, maybe they underperform quite drastically in the admissions assessment. Maybe they underperform quite drastically in the interviews. And in that case, it may well be true that they end up not receiving an offer. And sometimes, of course, they're kind of, I guess, disappointed or sort of angry about that because they say, but I have these amazing school results. But we don't only look at the school results. This is, again, the holistic thing. I suppose another way of talking about the kind of holistic approach is to say we're looking for consistency. Ideally, we're looking for people who achieve a higher level of performance, yes, in their school exams, whether GCSEs or, A-level or IB or whatever. But then they also achieve a high level of performance in all the kind of other indicators that we look at. And the people who do that, they'll almost certainly receive offers.
Yeah, I guess this doesn't help prospective students, but the parents will understand in that you can't rock up to a job interview without doing research of the company. Yeah, and we all know what the end of the story of that ends. I don't think many people wing through Cambridge admissions.
I mean, it's given the various things that we look at, I think it's really difficult to do it. And if you do have, the quickness of mind and the intelligence and the skill and all of that to wing it, I mean, kind of good luck to you. You're probably going to do well in life in some ways, but yeah, I just think it's a difficult process to wing your way through. I think the people who are successful tend to be people who just in a really sort of dogged and determined way, and without getting stressed about it, just prepare themselves for each of the stages and then try and perform as well as they can in the various stages of the process. They're usually the ones who receive the offers.
Yeah, I think winging through things is okay if needed, but trying to encourage yourself to have a work ethic is...
Yeah, winging through stuff isn't a good way to live your life.
No, it's a good skill to have, but I think especially in the Cambridge undergrads, if you were to get in, not many people can wing through the undergrads for most courses.
You get found out.
You'll get found out. Yeah, so talking about these kind of like situations of if we were to have like a prospective student, what decisions we would make. We actually had some hypothetical situations of prospective applicants and like what decisions we would make for these students that I wanted to ask you. One, I think we've already gone through just now. So I'm a student, I'm applying to Cambridge. I didn't have great... So if I didn't have great GCSEs, but I have like high predicted grades, did well in the like well-written personal statement, did well if I had an admissions assessment or written work, that was also really good. Interviews went really well. Is like am I getting an offer, or are my low GCSE grades going to hold me back?
So with GCSE grades and GCSE performance, I think if that was going to be a problem as part of the application, then it would, in most cases, mean that you weren't called for interviews. So in other words, if the GCSE performance was so comparatively weak that we were sufficiently concerned about that, and maybe going along with other parts of the application that were weak, especially if, say, the predicted grades were slightly under our standard conditional offer, then that might be part of a reason why someone wasn't called for interview. So if someone's reached the point that they've gone through the whole process and has been interviewed, again, I should emphasize here, I'm, speaking as director of admissions here at Trinity Hall, but I have counterparts, in all the other colleges, and around some of these, cases, they might adopt a slightly different view. As I indicated earlier, when we're making these decisions, not everybody sees every case in exactly the same way. But I think in this kind of hypothetical case, if someone's reached the stage of interviews, and if they've really impressed us in absolutely everything other than the GCSE performance, I think it's highly unlikely that the GCSE performance will be the deal breaker. Not by that late stage in the process. I think if it was going to be a deal breaker, it would come into effect a little bit earlier, and that might be one of the reasons why we didn't call someone for interview.
And just a slight tangent. Say if a student wasn't to have great GCSEs, and whether they applied in year 13 or not, but then they got phenomenal A-level grades, and they were to do their and then they were to apply with those great A-level grades. Do their bad GCSE results come into play? Are they relevant anymore?
Not really. I mean, again, we'd see them. We'd see that they're there. But if someone was applying post-qualification, we'd see their amazing A-level performance. And obviously, we just realise that GCSE performance isn't a brilliant predictor for how people perform in our own university exams, and A-levels are a better predictor of that. I mean, people underperform in GCSEs for all sorts of reasons, right? Sometimes they're ill, and obviously if we know about extenuating circumstances, then we factor that in. But sometimes they're just bored, or sometimes they just haven't started taking their academic work particularly seriously. They've got other stuff
16,
going on.
yeah.
Right. They're young, right? They're still figuring out what they're interested in. And over the years, I've seen so many cases of people getting really focused and energized at the A-level stage, or IB, or Scottish Highs, whatever it is. And so we're looking for people who are on an upward trajectory. We're looking for people who are sort of discovering their fascination with a particular subject. And that gives us a chance to kind of add some value. If we make them an offer and they come here, we can help them become even better at that subject. So that's what we're looking for. Yeah. So I think in that scenario, the A-level results are more important than the GCSE results.
Yeah. So another situation, students, very high predicted grades. Let's say 3 A stars is their predicted grades that their teachers have predicted them. But their admissions assessment wasn't too strong, their admissions test score, and their interview was below average. What kind of prospects does that applicant have? I mean, and there are other pieces of information that I haven't mentioned, but bearing on mind on just those pieces of information, I guess.
I guess we place less weight on the predicted grades than we would on performance in, say, the admissions assessment or the interviews. That's partly because schools predict grades in slightly different ways, and some schools we just know historically, let's say, are very, very, very optimistic in their predictions, and some schools we know historically are very, very, very pessimistic in their predictions. So predicted grades aren't something we can handle with huge certainty. If someone is predicted grades that are below a standard conditional offer, that sometimes causes us some concern, because it's basically the school saying to us, we don't really believe that this student is at the standard you're looking for. But if the predictions are at the standard conditional offer or above, that doesn't it doesn't necessarily have a big impact how much above the standard conditional offer they are, especially if they're predictions that come from a school that we know routinely predicts people, the maximum possible A-level result, 3 A stars or 4 A stars or whatever it is.
Yeah, which I guess is why the actual final grades are so much more valuable than predicted, because
there's no uncertainty, there's no guesswork. This is what the applicant achieved, so that's concrete factual results that we can trust.
Yeah. Funny story about predicted grades. When I was applying, I was applying for chemistry from Basvik. Brighton Sixth Form College. Really good state sixth form college in getting into Oxford applicants. Anyways, I was applying for chemistry and for Oxford, and I got predicted an A star in both maths and further maths, but I only got predicted an A in chemistry. So I was like, well, I'm applying for chemistry. This isn't an issue in that I am going, like, on paper I'll meet the entry requirements, but this could be an issue. And anyways, I went to the teachers and I sent in this long email, and I was like, I'll try really hard. I've been slacking, and I'll put in all of this extra work. But please, can you bump up my predicted grade? And I mean, they did like me, but they were like, no. They said, like, universities trust us to do accurate predicted grades, and if you were to if your final grade was to be below what would be predicted to you, they'll have less faith in us. And I know from what we've seen so far, Siam, we think you're going to get an A. I was like, I did.
Yeah. Sounds like you had good teachers.
And my final results were A star, and the A in chemistry. So
you see, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing.
It all worked out in the end. I got to where I wanted. I learned my lesson.
Exactly. Bribery doesn't work.
I was offering hard work ethic, which I guess we'll never know if I'd have followed through. I think I would have. No one knows. That's a bit of an insight to my journey with schools and predicted grades. The A stars I only just about got. But anyways, moving on. We've got another situation.
Okay. Is this one involving you, or is this okay?
Oh yeah, these are just all of the questions I had when I was applying.
Okay. Yeah, I understand how this is working.
Okay, so if a student had a phenomenal personal statement, but their interviews and admissions tests were average, they had okay GCSE results, and their predicted grades were, and let's say they met the entry requirements. So the question is basically, this student's application was average compared to the cohort, but their personal statement was phenomenal.
Yeah, the personal statement isn't normally enough in isolation to sort of, cause us to make an offer or not. As I mentioned before, it's a useful source of information. It might feature in some of the other parts of the process, like the interviews, for instance. You might be asked some questions based on it. But, I mean, they're called personal statements. We know in reality it's sometimes a group effort. Often teachers have some input. Often friends and family have some input. These days, maybe a bit of AI-based technology has a bit of an input. Although, why you do that for a personal statement seems odd to me. But anyway, hey, ChatGPT, write me a personal statement. You're probably better off doing that yourself. A personal statement might be really well written, but that doesn't give us any kind of certain insight into that applicant's ability and potential. It gives us some information about what they might be interested in, but it's the other parts of the process that we would place more trust in, I would say.
And another example is say like an applicant, they had their predicted grades, met the entry requirements, good personal statement, like aligned with the cohort, I guess, aligned with the cohort who are like still in play. Like I guess it's a good personal statement, but interview scores were good, but not phenomenal. But their admissions test was just phenomenal. Like they're one of the like a very high admissions test score. So what kind of conversations will be happening around that applicant?
They're the sort of applicants where we would have a long conversation, I imagine. Again, this is where it might depend a little bit on which subject, because for some of the admissions tests we have quite strong correlation patterns between performance in the admissions assessment and performance in our own university exams. And so for some subjects, the admissions assessment certainly plays a significant role. And again, we'd be highly unlikely to make an offer to someone who had a really weak admissions assessment performance, even if everything else was strong. But if someone has a really strong admissions assessment performance, then we'd like that to be supported by at least some of the other elements also being strong. As I said earlier, we're kind of looking for consistency. We know that it's true of any of us. We can have like a one-off good day when we're just, amazing on a given day. But in order to cope with the kind of courses that we offer here, the students need to be pretty good at what they do kind of day in, day out during term. And so, we just want to make sure that the people who receive the offers are people who, when they come here, are going to be able to keep pace with the course and achieve a high level on a regular basis, not just, one-off kind of a bit by chance, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I see what you mean, yeah. But I guess I'm thinking, I think there is a slight difference between the subjects where the admissions assessment is like a test compared to like an essay. I guess you could say that's the same for the A-levels, and that's a whole other conversation. But in terms of comparing humanities A-levels and science A-levels. But I think it's hard to... am I right in saying it's harder to judge an admissions assessment essay is like phenomenal? Maybe that isn't difficult to judge. But if someone's got 100% on the admissions test and the second best mark was, I don't know, 70%, that is very, I think that's a much clearer comparison, if you see what I'm getting at.
Absolutely, I see what you're getting at. But if someone did get 100% in any of like the science admissions assessments, that would be a first, because they're designed so that no one ever really gets 100%. Okay. They only ever get, maybe around sort of 70% or something. But I think for the arts and humanities subjects where we sometimes ask for essay-based admissions assessments, for those particular courses, let's say something like English, for instance, the way we sort of make use of the admissions assessment is it is marked, it is given a score, and so we have that kind of number in mind. But when we get to the point of really making our decisions as to who we make offers to, we'll read through the essay ourselves. So we don't just kind of bin it and just go with the score that it's been given. We're reading it through, because what we're trying to do there is think, okay, so let's see what kind of essay this person has written in relation to this topic in English literature, just to take that example. And how can we see that person developing if they were to arrive here and have the really sort of close contact with teachers and develop their essay writing skills? How much have they already started to move in that kind of direction in the written work that they've produced? So it's not like getting 70% or 80%, but for people who are used to assessing applicants in those areas, you read through the written work and you think, this person is good, this person is good, and as I say, it's not the only thing we'd look at, but if they did well in the interviews and if other things were nice about the application, the written work that they've produced as part of their admissions assessment might well be a really significant element in that decision. Maybe the interviews were a little bit weaker than some of the other applicants we're considering, But if the written work is just, so much more impressive, we might say, well, okay, putting all of that together holistically, that's what we're going to offer to this person.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess they're not oral exams, are they? For humanities, they're written exams.
Yep, exactly. When they're here as students, it's all written exams. So someone might be really good at talking about a subject. That's not how they're going to be assessed here. They're going to have to write about it. So we're looking for students who can write well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just the last thing about admissions assessments that I wanted to raise is that I guess one thing that's good about them is that all of the applicants are taking the same admissions test.
Absolutely.
And it's one piece of information where it's all of the applicants are kind of answering the same, like doing the same task.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not everyone applies from the same school exam background. Exactly. As we already said, some are doing A level, some are doing IB, and people apply from all around the world. So some people are doing like Hong Kong diplomas. There's all sorts of different qualifications, but everyone applying for the same subject takes the same admissions assessment. So it gives us a way of really comparing and contrasting for that cohort. Who performed best, who performed worst, and where the other applicants were distributed in the sort of bell curve distribution.
Yeah, nice. So, do you think anyone will notice that we've recorded these two separately?
No, I don't think so. It'll be seamless when it's edited.
I meant more because of the sunlight.
We can't control that.
Anyways, the next thing that we have on here, regards to how we assess applicants, is I guess there's a bit of a buzzwords that we use for Cambridge and Oxford's admissions, and I imagine it's for a lot of universities, called contextualisation, that we contextualise applicants' applications. Can you explain to us what is contextualisation?
Yeah, it normally just refers to various bits of information that we have, often referred to as contextual data, and it can consist of a range of things. So, for instance, it can be things like whether an applicant is on free school meals or whether they've been in care, something like that. So it's basically various pieces of information that give us an insight into often the educational background of the person or perhaps their socioeconomic circumstances. And the reason why universities, including Cambridge, are interested in these things is because it provides us with additional context. Hence the buzzword, that enable us hopefully to assess the applications as fairly as possible. Because if we're assessing an application from someone who's come from a very sort of challenging background, maybe they have been in care or maybe they are on free school meals, then we just need to make sure that we're mindful of that while we're assessing their application. And they might have really significant academic ability and potential, but the difficulties that they've encountered in their background may have made it more difficult for them to sort of manifest those things in the same way as an applicant who's come from a background where they've had a lot of support and no major kind of complexities or problems to deal with. So that's why we sort of look at it. And at Cambridge, we don't make what are sometimes called contextual offers. So we don't lower our standard conditional offer when we make offers to applicants who have certain contextual flags. We just usually make the same standard conditional offer that we'd normally make. But then if an applicant with certain contextual flags just misses their offer, then we are able to reprieve them if we feel that that's appropriate. And so every year some colleges do reprieve some people. But yeah, that's basically what contextualization sort of refers to, and that's how we sort of incorporate it into our decision making at Cambridge. But it's also done at other universities.
Yeah, I guess. Sorry, with like contextualization and contextualizing applicants' applications, their profiles. I think the sense of controversy around the topic is, I think people believe that the admissions department's main aim is to find an argument to provide an offer to someone who is flagged who is part of one of these flags, with free school meals, etc. But that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not the case. Then first and foremost, aim is to find students who have the potential to thrive at Cambridge.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we'd never make someone an offer simply because and solely because they're on free school meals or solely because they've been in care.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we make offers to students who are going to thrive and flourish here and cope with the courses and really enjoy the courses and feel challenged by them, but be able to make good progress. So the emphasis is always on academic ability and potential. That's the kind of phrase that I keep saying because it is genuinely what we focus on. But we just want to make judgments about that as fairly as possible, and that's where the contextual considerations come into play.
And there's also contextual considerations when it comes to which schools the students have come from and comparing their GCSE performances compared to how well the school performs in the average student's GCSEs from that school. Can you shed a bit more light on that? And
yeah, so we always have information about where the applicants took their GCSEs, certainly for UK-based applicants, and we have information about the sort of standard grades that people from a given school obtain for GCSEs, and we can see how that school is situated in relation to all the other schools in the country. So we can see whether they're above average or below average. And so again, that just gives us another way of contextualizing the academic performance of the people who apply to us. If they come from a school where on average they're considerably below the mean in terms of GCSE performance for all the schools in the country, and if that student obtains really strong GCSE marks, that's an amazing performance. That suggests that they've really performed far in excess of what students at that school normally achieve. Whereas conversely, if someone comes from a school where students typically get 9s and 8s at GCSE and they get 9s and 8s, then that's really impressive. Good that they've performed that well, but it's not outstanding for that school. It's fairly normal for that school. So it just gives us a little bit of additional contextual information, because we know that when people apply, we're not always comparing like with like, because people come from different educational backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So we just need to make sure, as I said earlier, really, that we're handling those things as fairly as possible, so that we don't place applicants at a disadvantage unfairly.
Yeah, and I guess I think, at least for me, it's when looking at schools and the average student's performance from a school, really it's quite clear to picture a student's potential depending on how well they do in that. Say if a student comes from a school that doesn't perform as well normally in terms of GCSE results, but they were to do extremely well, much better than the average student, that shows that they have a lot of potential. Yep. It's not like a potential being a word that it's hard to define it without using the word potential. It's not a certainty yep. that they will yep. thrive, but given the context and their academic performance and the academic performance based on that, in that context, it looks like that they could really thrive in Cambridge. But we're only in this part, we're specifically talking about just GCSE grades, and as we've already explained, GCSE grades are only one part of a whole host of pieces of information that we use to assess applicants, and obviously all of those pieces of information can be contextualized. But I think as we're going through this podcast, we're realizing how much attention to detail there is in the admissions process with each student, just to really like talk about it directly, because there is a lot of accusations, whether it's in universities in the US or Oxford and Cambridge, that Cambridge, we positively discriminate when we give out offers, in that there's been accusations that we're discriminating against independent schools, and we're actively choosing maintained schools or students with free school meals. Can you explain just very clearly what is the difference between contextualisation and positive discrimination?
Yeah, I think the difference is basically when we look at the contextual data that we have, we're trying to develop as accurate a picture as we can of that applicant and their sort of educational journey, so that we can make good decisions. Whereas I tend to think of positive discrimination as being a bit more focused on specific attributes, and the decision making being largely determined by that. So I think if we had a policy whereby, you know, as a university, we had a quota, you know, we had to make a certain number of offers to people who are on school meals, and so as an admissions tutor, I might be in a situation where I didn't actually think someone had the academic ability and potential to really cope with the course, but because they're on free school meals, I better make them an offer so that we meet our quota. The latter seems to me much closer to being sort of positive discrimination. There are reasons why, you know, that might be a good thing to do. My concern would be that if we were to do that, you know, if in this hypothetical scenario, if someone was on free school meals, but they really underperformed in all the other indicators, so their GCSE performance wasn't great, and their performance in the admissions assessment wasn't great, and their performance in the interviews wasn't great, I'd be concerned that they wouldn't cope with the course. And it's probably just worth mentioning that at Cambridge, the dropout rate that we have is quite remarkably low. It's always kind of under 1%. It's often around sort of, you know, 0.7 or something like that. So the vast majority of the students who come here complete their courses. And that's very different at some of the universities where, you know, the dropout rate is much higher. And I think that's just worth mentioning because, you know, I've probably said so often already during this podcast, you know, this phrase academic ability and potential, that people kind of get sick of it. But that sort of underlines that a little bit. I think if we weren't primarily focused on that, and if we were making decisions that were primarily based on sort of positive discrimination type considerations, I think we'd have a much higher dropout rate.
Yeah. Yes. Oh yeah, I never thought of that. That is a good point. Yeah, because there is such a low dropout rate, so you must be doing something right.
You hope.
You hope. I was just thinking. I guess there's only one thing that we do positively discriminate is probably the wrong words, but we discriminate against those who show less potential compared to if there are those who show more potential. I guess the underlying definition of positive discrimination is when you're wrongfully choosing other attributes that aren't related to the main aim, but Cambridge doesn't do that. And as you said, there are no quotas that we try to meet, is purely due to assessing an applicant's academic ability.
Yep.
So, we've spoken already that we do want to do a longer podcast on independent schools and state schools, and how the culture and the stats have changed over the past 20-30 years, and engaging with the what's the words, kind of like outside news that we have been discriminating against independent schools, and trying to put the record straight on that. And there's one sense of feeling that parents, teachers, students have, is that if you come from an independent school, you're much less likely to get into Cambridge now compared to before, like I say, compared to 20 years. I guess without going into that very quickly, one very quick potential answer to that would be that there's a lot more people applying to Cambridge now, so there's just a bigger pool of applicants. But I wanted to put this hypothetical solution to you because I think it's important for for the audience to hear. So say I had like a student, went to an independent school, did like really good GCSEs, really good personal statement, did very well in their admissions test or written work, very good interview. Would they like receive an offer?
Yes, I think is the short answer. I mean, if someone's impressed us across all of those things, and those are all the things that we're kind of looking at in this sort of holistic assessment, it would be difficult to find a reason not to make an offer in that case.
So I guess the counter to that is that people would be unsure. They would struggle to believe that immediately because they would say, oh, even if that student came from a really high performing independent school, would that make the decision harder for them to give them an offer, even if they did really well in the other aspects of the process?
No, I think if someone impressed us across all of those things, I think, again, I'm speaking on behalf of this college, Trinity Hall. I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of all the colleges because my counterparts there can speak about how they'd handle it. But yeah, I think I'm pretty confident I can say that the vast majority of colleges, someone in that situation would receive an offer. They've just impressed us across all of the things that we look at. It would be unfair not to make them an offer. I think if someone was in a situation, they were at a really, really good independent school and they impressed us in some respects, but then didn't impress us in others. And then if we were having a conversation where we were comparing them to, say, an applicant who impressed us in the same kinds of things and was less impressive in the same kind of things, and went to a maintained sector or a state sector school that was a really challenging environment, not particularly well resourced as a school and all of that sort of stuff, then the school type might be something that comes up in the discussion, because all other things being equal, that might be one of the factors that ends up being discussed at some point when we're making the decision. But as I said earlier, really, it's when applicants end up in that kind of middle ground where they've impressed us in some respects, but not in others, that there's no guarantee that they'll receive an offer. There are reasons why we convince ourselves not to make an offer, and there are reasons why we could convince ourselves to make an offer. So that's always a more precarious position to be in, regardless of which school you're applying from. But yeah, someone who impresses us across all the things we look at, we're going to make them an offer.
Yeah, I think that's obvious to us, but I think there are some people who do feel like there's some kind of like witch hunt going on against I guess independent schools, and that's just not what we see from like the actual admission side. There is just like so much attention to detail to all of these facets to try our best to make the right decisions, and as I hope we've shown through this podcast. And lastly, so like I know this word contextualisation, like is it any different to so when we like I can't speak. Is it any different to assessing an applicant holistically? Because it's, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like contextualisation and assessing an applicant holistically kind of the same thing.
Yeah, certainly from the way I look at it and the way I think many of my colleagues look at it, it's basically the same thing. So holistically just means paying close attention to all the pieces of information that we have about every application we consider. And that includes the contextual data that we look at. Yeah. So I just think, an holistic approach will necessarily look at those sorts of pieces of information about the context in which a person's been, studying and developing. So yeah, when I say we assess things holistically, that's
Yeah.
what I mean. And as I say, I think many of my colleagues would say exactly the same.
And just on the last note, just in terms of how we assess applicants, that's also under constant review by the university.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, pretty much every year. Well, no, it's true. Every year after we've been through one admission cycle, all the colleges come together and we reflect really, really carefully on the various parts of the process, and if there have been any complexities with any of the parts of the process, we consider ways to improve it or to make it more efficient or more effective or whatever we need to do. If there are additional pieces of information that it would be useful for us to consider, then we can make decisions about including those so that we have even more pieces of contextual information, whatever it may be. So, yeah, none of this is ever, set in stone for like a decade. Some parts of it remain relatively stable over quite a long period of time, but every year there are some modifications to try to make sure that we're looking carefully at all the things we really should be looking at if we're going to get to a point where we're making, good decisions for good reasons.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, God, I had something to say, but now it's gone.
That's difficult in a podcast. A lot of this depends upon us talking.
God, we shouldn't have done this in the afternoon. Okay. What was I going to say?
We'll have to start doing telepathic podcasts.
What was the last question? I really wanted to say it now. I can edit it in if I just remember. What were we talking about?
Independent schools.
Were we? No,
A bit.
a bit.
Revising the process.
I was going to have to say goodbye to them, aren't I? What was the last question? God, it's really annoying. It was actually a really good thing I was going to say.
That's what I say about all the things I can't remember. It was genius. I just can't remember it. It transformed the world. If only I'd written it down.
It was actually really good. Oh my God, it's gone.
We'll do a separate podcast on it.
I don't think it was that long.
It wasn't that good.
It wasn't that good. But no, what so
We were talking about
contextualising is the same as assessing
Yeah.
holistically. How did we go on to such a? No, because I asked you another question, didn't I? Do we assess it year on year?
Yeah.
You said we do.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gone. No idea.
Sometimes you have to let things go.
All right. Well, thanks, Marcus. Very long podcast. Hope the viewers enjoyed it. Definitely do let us know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future podcasts. If you have any questions about this podcast, do let us know as well, and we'll try our best to quickly get back to you. We'll stay tuned for next time. I'm sure we'll be back with you soon. And yeah. Oh, God. That's really thrown me off.
It's okay.
It's okay. We'll just end it there. God. Yes.
I can't think what it would have been. Like there was nothing obvious